She's bleeding out on the station floor, her tongue severed for telling the truth. A human mechanic watches the brutal punishment and makes a choice that will risk his life. He carries her to safety, whispering, "I'm not with them," as Valkyrie justice closes in. This isn't just rescue, it's rebellion. The chant starts low, then builds. "You dare speak against the High Council?" It bounces off the cold metal walls of the corridor, a rhythm of anger and fear. Nari stands in the center of the circle, her wrists bound. Her crime was simple, she told the truth. She reported the contamination in the supply lines, the deliberate poisoning. Her job was quality control. She did it too well. The Valkyrie official steps forward, his uniform crisp, his expression cold. He doesn't look at her face, just the space where she stands. The punishment for challenging trade agreements is always the same. Silence, not just a warning, a permanent physical silence. The crowd knows what's coming. Some look away. Most don't. Public punishments like this are a tool. They teach obedience through fear. They show everyone the cost of dissent in a closed society. A guard steps up behind Nari. He forces her jaw open. She struggles, a brief, useless movement. The tool he uses is simple, metallic, and sharp. The act is quick, brutally efficient. There's a wet final sound. Blood hits the deck plating, dark and thick, pooling around her boots. She makes a choked noise, a gurgle that is the last sound her own voice will ever make. The silence that follows is heavier than the chanting. Jeremy watches from the edge of the crowd, his mechanic's hands clenched at his sides. He smells the ozone from the station's systems, the coppery tang of blood. His instinct is to look down, to check a readout on his wrist comp, to find a reason to be anywhere else. Self-preservation screams at him to turn around, to walk back to his workshop and forget what he saw. But his eyes are locked on her, on the blood, on the way her body trembles. The Valkyrie justice system offers no appeals, no mercy. This display cements the station's power structure. Human contract workers on the bottom, Valkyrie authority on top. Their rules, their punishments. The official gives a slight nod. The show is over. The crowd begins to disperse, the lesson delivered. Nari's knees buckle. She collapses onto the cold floor, her life literally draining from her onto the grating. The crowd parts around her, a river flowing around a stone. Nobody stops. Nobody helps. They just leave her there, bleeding out in the sudden echoing quiet. Jeremy's hands trembled. He could feel the vibration in his knuckles as he pushed through the dispersing crowd, a lone figure swimming upstream. The metallic reek of fresh blood hit him, thick and sharp. Station security moved through the thinning bodies, their armored forms cutting clean paths. They ignored him. He was just another human mechanic. Insignificant, every muscle in his body screamed at him to walk away, to keep his head down, to not attract the attention of the Valkyrie enforcers still stationed at the perimeter. Their weapons were holstered, but their postures were alert. He knew the math. One human against Valkyrie security. Those odds were worse than hopeless. His gaze dropped to the deck plating. To her. Nari. She was trying to push herself up on one elbow. Her mouth, a ruined mess, worked silently. A fresh trickle of dark blood traced a path down her chin, dripping onto the collar of her uniform. Her eyes, wide and desperate, found his. They weren't pleading. They were insistent. She was trying to form words with a mouth that could no longer make them. It was a wrenching, silent fight to communicate. His mind flipped through a disconnected file of memories. The maintenance bay gossip, rumors about supply quality. Her section, quality control. She handled the environmental seals, the biofilters. She would have seen the contamination reports first. She knew something. Something someone had paid a brutal price to keep silent. The calculation in his head shifted. This wasn't just about saving a life. That was a dangerous enough proposition. This was about a truth so volatile it got a woman's tongue cut out in public. A truth that was still bleeding on the floor in front of him. Letting her die here meant that truth died with her. The injustice of it was a physical pressure in his chest. He scanned the corridor. Cameras were mounted at every junction, their red LEDs glowing. The station's surveillance network was vast, but it had blind spots. His workshop was one of them. He jury-rigged the sensors himself, layered the walls with spare shielding to block energy leaks from his more experimental projects. It was a chaotic mess of human and alien tech, but it was his. It was the only place on this level they wouldn't be seen. He made the choice. There was no grand moment of courage, just a grim acceptance of the new math. The risk of walking away now outweighed the risk of action. He moved fast before he could think about it again. He knelt beside her, the cold deck grating biting through his trousers. His hands now steady, slid under her shoulders and knees. She was lighter than he expected. Her body was rigid with pain and shock. He lifted her, cradling her against his chest. Her blood immediately soaked into the fabric of his work shirt, warm and wet. He turned, putting his back to the last of the security patrol, and started moving against the sluggish flow of the crowd. As he walked, his mouth close to her ear, he muttered the words, a low promise meant only for her. I'm not with them. He was just a mechanic. But he was stepping into a war. The heavy workshop door slid shut and sealed with a deep pneumatic hiss. The roar of the station vanished. The only sound left was Nari's ragged, wet breathing, a desperate rhythm in the sudden quiet. Jeremy's sanctuary smelled of ozone, warm metal, and lubricant. It was a chaotic cave of half-dismantled machinery, sensor arrays stripped for parts and tools scattered across workbenches. Wires snaked across the floor. A half-finished project, a hybrid human Valkyrie power converter, sat on the central bench, its guts exposed and humming softly. This was his domain, a messy mix of two technologies, a place where he could bend the rules. He laid her gently on a cleared section of floor, grabbing a clean rag from a pile. The tension was a live wire in the room. He knew the protocols. Valkyrie patrols ran periodic bioscans of the sector, hunting for unauthorized life signs, for the energy signature of unregistered medtech. His jury-rigged shielding scrambled the worst of it, a scrambled signal that would read as minor power fluctuations, but a focused search would punch right through it. They had minutes, maybe less, before someone wondered where the body went. He worked fast, his hands moving with a mechanic's precision. He pulled his emergency med kit from under a console. Cross-species first aid was a gamble. Valkyrie biochemistry was different. Their blood a darker hue, their tissue density higher. A standard coagulant could clot the wound or it could trigger a toxic reaction. He chose the broad-spectrum synth gel, the most neutral option he had, and applied it carefully to the ruin of her mouth. The gel foamed slightly on contact, stemming the flow of blood. Infection was the next enemy. Alien bacteria introduced into a human system, or vice versa, could be a death sentence. He had no biofilters refined enough for this. Her eyes were wide open, locked on his face. She tried to speak, a hoarse, awful sound that was just air and pain. She shook her head, frustrated. Then her hands came up. She started to sign, her fingers moving in sharp, precise gestures. It wasn't a language he knew, but the meaning was clear. She pointed past him, her finger stabbing toward his main console, its screen dark. She mimed typing, then pointed at her own eyes. She pointed at the data ports on the wall. Her urgency was a physical force. He finally understood. This wasn't just about her. It was about what she knew. She'd found something. She'd reported it, and reporting it had gotten her tongue cut out. Contamination. The word hung between them, heavy and poisonous. The shielding on the workshop might hide them for a short while, but it wouldn't survive a determined search. If they were scanning for her, they'd find her. They were sitting on a bomb. Her hand shot out, gripping his forearm. Her strength surprised him. She pointed again, insistently, at the console. She made a gesture like opening something, then pointed at herself. Her meaning was unmistakable. The proof wasn't out there. It was in here. She had the data. She'd saved it. She was trying to tell him that the evidence, the files that could prove the contamination was deliberate, was stored somewhere he could access. She was handing him the weapon that had already almost killed her. Her gaze was intense, pleading. The dangerous secret she'd tried to expose was now his to uncover. Jeremy moved to a locked cabinet bolted to the wall behind a cluttered workbench. He keyed in a code, his fingers moving fast. The lock released with a heavy clunk. Inside, nestled in foam padding, was a case of brushed metal. It looked out of place among his greasy tools and salvaged parts. He lifted it out and placed it on the bench. The lid hissed open. Inside, on a black plinth, lay the Neuralink interface. It was a delicate silver circlet, slender and complex, with fine filaments that shimmered under the workshop lights. It was human design, but leagues beyond standard station tech. This prototype was his secret, his high-stakes gamble. He'd acquired it through channels that didn't ask questions, a piece of bleeding-edge innovation he'd been modifying in his spare time. Its value could buy a small ship. Its existence in his workshop made him a target for every tech thief on Helio Station. He looked from the device to Nari. Her eyes followed his every move, wide with a mixture of pain and sharp intelligence. He knew the numbers. Neural interfaces were finicky, calibrated for human neurochemistry. Pushing one onto a Valkyrie brain could trigger a feedback loop, a fatal neural cascade. It was a massive gamble with her life. He picked up the circlet. It was cool and surprisingly light in his hand. He turned to her, keeping his voice low and even. "This connects here," he said, tapping his own temple. "It reads the signals from your brain, the ones that form words. It bypasses the damage, the physical part." He gestured vaguely toward her mouth. "It finds the pathways for speech and projects them. Gives you a voice without one." He didn't sugarcoat it. "The calibration is for a human brain. Yours is different. It might not work. It might hurt you, badly." He watched her process this. Neural tech wasn't a universal fix. Getting it right required precise mapping of a species-specific nervous system. A miscalculation could burn out brain functions, leave her a vegetable, or simply stop her heart. Her gaze flicked from the device to his face. He saw the understanding there, and beneath it a sharp, cold fear. It wasn't just fear of the machine. It was the fear of dependency. She was placing her ability to communicate, her only remaining weapon, entirely in the hands of a human stranger. She would be tethered to him, to this machine utterly vulnerable. The procedure itself was its own kind of violation. It required a direct, intimate connection. He would have to place the interface on her skin, the fine filament seeking a link with her neural architecture. It was a physical and mental intrusion, a merging of human and alien technology at the most fundamental level. There were no protocols for this, no safety nets. He held the Neuralink out, not offering it, just showing it to her. The decision had to be hers. The risk was absolute. The silence stretched, filled only by the hum of the workshop's power conduits and her strained breathing. Her eyes locked on the silver band. She seemed to weigh the terrifying silence of her future against the terrifying possibility of a voice. Her hand, trembling slightly, came up. She didn't reach for the device. Instead, she pointed a single finger at it, then pointed firmly at her own head. Her gaze met his, clear and resolved. She gave a single sharp nod. She understood the danger. She accepted it. This was her only chance to speak her truth, and she was willing to bet her life on a human mechanic and his stolen technology. He pressed the Neuralink to her temple. The device fit snugly against her skin. It emitted a soft, low hum, almost like a purr. Tiny lights flickered to life across its silver surface, dancing in a complex, silent rhythm. The connection was live. Jeremy didn't breathe. His eyes were fixed on the portable med scanner propped beside them. The screen showed her heart rate, her neural activity, her oxygen levels. His hand hovered near the device's emergency disconnect switch. One wrong signal, one spike in brain activity that looked like a seizure, and he'd rip it off her. This was the moment of truth. Valkyrie neurochemistry was fundamentally different. Human tech interfacing with an alien brain could trigger a rejection. A neural cascade could cook her synapses from the inside out, leaving her brain dead in seconds. The risk was as high as it got. Her body reacted first. Her back arched off the floor, a sharp, involuntary spasm of muscle. Her fingers curled into fists. He almost disconnected right then. But then the tension broke. Her body settled back down, relaxing into the connection. Her breathing, still ragged from her injury, evened out just a fraction. First-time neural links are a shock to the system. They flood the mind with raw sensory input, a tidal wave of information the brain has to learn to process. It's overwhelming, disorienting. For a long moment, there was only silence and the hum of the device. Then a voice. It wasn't a sound that traveled through the air. It appeared directly in his mind, clear and synthesized, yet carrying the distinct echo of her consciousness. It was a single quiet thought projected straight into his awareness. "Thank you. The technology worked." It was a miracle. But the relief was immediately chased by a cold, hard reality. They weren't just two people in a workshop anymore. They were now accomplices. He had just used illegal, highly classified human tech on a Valkyrie citizen. She was now accessing that tech to recall council secrets she'd been mutilated for possessing. They had crossed a line from which there was no return. The Valkyrie authorities would treat this as high treason, theft of intellectual property, and espionage. The punishment for any one of those charges was execution. He watched her eyes. They were focused on something he couldn't see. The Neuralink gave her a new interface with her own mind. She was pulling up files, memories, data streams. He could almost see her organizing it, sorting through the evidence of the contamination with a clarity she hadn't possessed minutes before. She was building a case inside her own head, preparing testimony, finding the proof. The weapon was now active. The shared risk of the procedure, the intimate violation of the connection, it fused them together. They were partners now. This was no longer a defensive game of hide and seek. Jeremy looked from her face to the scanner readings, then out at the shielded door of his workshop. The hiding was over. They were hunkered down with a live weapon and a target on their backs. The only move left was to use it. He realized their goal had just violently shifted. They were no longer preparing to defend. They were preparing to attack. The portable med scanner hummed in Jeremy's hand. He ran it over Nari's torso, a routine check. He needed a baseline for her vitals beyond the trauma to her mouth. He watched the screen, expecting elevated heart rate, stress markers, the physical echoes of her torture. The initial readings scrolled past. Then the device emitted a sharp, urgent beep. A red warning glyph flashed on the display. Anomaly detected. He frowned, tapping the screen to clear the alert. It didn't clear. The data stream locked onto a new set of biomarkers. The scanner's analysis algorithm, designed for broad diagnostic work, highlighted a genetic signature it couldn't categorize. It flagged two distinct sets of markers intertwined on a fundamental level. One set was clearly identifiably Valkyrie. The other was just as clearly human. They weren't just present. They were fused. A hybrid signature. The scanner's logic stuttered, attempting to reconcile the data. The reading was clear, definitive, and it indicated a pregnancy. Jeremy stared at the screen, his mind refusing to process it. A human-Valkyrie hybrid. That wasn't just rare. It was a biological impossibility. Every scientific text, every medical journal stated that cross-species reproduction between their kinds was non-viable. No recorded cases existed. The fundamental building blocks of their DNA were too alien to each other. The truth of it hit him like a physical blow. He looked from the cold, hard data on the screen to Nari's face. Her eyes were wide, watching him. She saw his shock. Through the Neuralink, she felt the disbelieving jolt of his realization a split second before he could form the words. A torrent of raw emotion flooded the connection. It wasn't just his shock. It was hers. A whirlwind of fear, confusion, and a startling protective surge. The emotions weren't separate. They bled together through the link, a shared, overwhelming wave. He finally spoke, his voice low and rough. The scanner says, "You're pregnant." The words hung in the air between them, absurd and undeniable. In her Valkyrie culture, the value of new life was paramount. This child would be sacred, a miracle that defied their own understanding of biology. In human terms, it was a scientific breakthrough that would rewrite textbooks. It was a living bridge between two warring peoples, a symbol made flesh. The air in the workshop changed. The mission shifted its weight, its center of gravity moving. This was no longer just about exposing a crime, about bringing justice for a past wrong. The contamination, the conspiracy, the danger, it all snapped into a new, terrifying focus. This was about the future now. It was about legacy. The evidence they held wasn't just proof of a poisoning. It was a threat to the life growing inside her. Exposing Dravik meant protecting their child from the same systemic rot he'd created. The fight was no longer abstract. It was immediate, biological, and utterly personal. The scanner's screen still glowed with the impossible truth, reframing their desperate rebellion into a fight for a family that shouldn't exist, a future that defied every law they knew. Nari's consciousness, channeled through the Neuralink, streamed the evidence directly into the workshop's main console. The screen lit up with a waterfall of data. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't negligence. The contamination was systematic, a calculated program of poisoning aimed at the human colonies. The evidence was methodical. Supply manifests, environmental seals, quality reports, all pointed to a single chilling conclusion. This was deliberate, orchestrated at the highest levels of Valkyrie power. High Counselor Dravik's authorization codes appeared on half a dozen documents. His digital signature was on the orders that greenlit the tainted shipments. He wasn't just aware of it. He was the architect. The program had his fingerprints all over it. The sheer audacity of it was staggering. He'd used his position not just to approve this, but to personally profit from it. The files showed he was selling cheaper, poisoned supplies to human outposts, a double betrayal that put thousands of lives at risk for his own gain. The weapon itself was insidious. Microscopic parasites engineered for a specific cruel purpose. They were slow-acting. They didn't kill quickly. They caused a gradual neurological decay, a slow, agonizing death that mimicked natural degenerative diseases. The design was a tactical masterstroke of interstellar warfare. It guaranteed deniability. By the time the effects showed, the source would be untraceable. The human doctors would diagnose a plague. They'd never suspect a targeted biological attack disguised as medical aid. The Valkyrie had exploited the trade agreements themselves. The pacts designed for peace and commerce became the perfect cover. They used the legitimate supply chains, the trusted routes, to introduce their poison. The system built on mutual benefit was turned into a weapon. It was a silent invasion, a genocide hiding behind invoices and shipping labels. The scale of it was horrifying. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was a policy. The files raised a darker question about his own people. Human authorities on the station had to have seen the anomalous medical reports, the spike in neurological cases. They either missed it completely, a catastrophic failure of oversight, or they were complicit. They turned a blind eye for the sake of maintaining the fragile peace or for a cut of the profits. The betrayal ran that deep. It wasn't just an alien plot. It was a conspiracy that reached into the heart of human leadership as well. The entire scheme served one purpose: Valkyrie dominance. Weaken the human colonies through a silent, suffering war. Create dependence. Control the outer territories through sickness and fear. All while Dravik and his cronies got richer. They were playing a long game, and the prize was everything. The proof they now held in this shielded room was more explosive than any plasma charge. This data could start a war between species, a conflict that would burn across the stars. Or, if they were very smart and very lucky, it could be the one thing that prevented that war from ever happening. They were holding a lit fuse. The only choice was where to point it. Commander Holt was their one shot, their only potential ally with any kind of authority on the station. He led the human security detachment, a small force operating under strict Valkyrie oversight. His power was limited, a negotiated concession in the station's charter. He could break up a bar fight, maybe detain a human for questioning, but he answered to the Valkyrie High Council. His loyalty was an open question. He could be part of the corruption, bought and paid for by Dravik, or he could decide that the easiest way to keep the station's fragile peace was to hand them over to the authorities. The risk was huge. Jeremy initiated contact through a secure maintenance channel. He bypassed the official comms net entirely, using an encrypted frequency reserved for engineering diagnostics. It was a quieter signal, harder to trace. The story of a whistleblower in a cross-jurisdictional mess rarely ends well. Protections fail. The system, any system, tends to protect itself. The first rule of survival is to assume you're on your own. Holt's voice came back over the secure line. It was low, cautious, all business. He didn't dismiss the message outright. He listened. Jeremy laid out the basics: contamination, deliberate poisoning, council authorization. He didn't mention Nari's name, or the pregnancy. Holt's response was measured, but a note of interest cut through the professional skepticism. He'd seen things, he admitted. Anomalies in the medical reports from the human sectors, upticks in neurological cases that didn't fit any known pattern. He'd filed his own queries. They'd been ignored, buried in bureaucratic red tape. That got his attention. They arranged a meeting. Neutral ground, a maintenance hub in the buffer zone between the main human and Valkyrie sectors. It was a noisy, automated space full of the thrum of machinery and coolant pumps. The constant industrial din would cover their conversation from audio surveillance. Few patrols went through there. It was a good place to talk, a terrible place to get cornered. Getting there was a 3-level problem. It meant moving through sectors with different security protocols, bypassing multiple checkpoints. They'd have to use service corridors, maintenance lifts, and access tunnels that weren't on the public maps. Every junction was a potential ambush point. Every camera a potential witness. They planned the route like a tactical insertion, identifying choke points and fallback positions. The escape plan wasn't clean. It was a series of desperate maneuvers hoping to buy enough time to run. The resolution was a tense verbal handshake over a crackling encrypted line. Holt agreed to meet. He agreed to listen to the evidence. But he made no promises. He wouldn't guarantee their safety. He wouldn't swear to believe them. His allegiance was to the station's stability, and he would decide which version of the truth best served that goal after he'd seen the proof. He was offering a chance, not a guarantee. It was a slim thread of hope, but it was the only one they had to expose the truth while a station-wide manhunt was gathering force outside the workshop door. Their plan relied on convincing one cautious, overburdened security chief to risk his career, and possibly his life. On the word of a mechanic and a mutilated woman, the concept arrived in his mind not as words, but as a complete understanding, flowing through the Neuralink like warm water. Nari explained her culture's most fundamental law. Among her people, to save a life was not an act of simple charity. It forged a bond, a deep, unbreakable obligation. It was a connection that carried weight, responsibility, and the distinct possibility of something more. It was a door opening, a path forward that hadn't existed before. His act in the corridor, pulling her from that bloody circle, had triggered this ancient, powerful custom. It now wrapped around them both, crossing the vast divide between human and Valkyrie, tying their fates together with a strength neither of them could ignore. This new bond pulled at him. It wasn't a debt to be repaid. It was a gravity well, drawing him into her orbit, into her fight. The tension was a live wire in the quiet of the workshop, this unspoken contract between species. She found a way to break it, to lighten it. A flicker of dry amusement came through the link, followed by a teasing observation about human social habits. The way humans crowded together in noisy groups, their blunt emotional expressions, their strange food. She found a dark humor in the absurdity of their situation, a mute alien and a human mechanic, hiding from her government, communicating through stolen tech. It was a desperate joke, but it was theirs. Shared trauma does that. It forges connections faster than anything else. Facing death together strips away pretense. It leaves behind something raw and real. The trauma of her mutilation, the constant fear of discovery, the weight of the evidence they carried, it all built a foundation of mutual reliance. They weren't just two individuals anymore. They were a unit. Then the pregnancy added its own layer, its own profound gravity. The child was a fact now, a living, growing reality. It would be Valkyrie. It would be human. It would belong to both of them, and to neither culture entirely. It was a new thing in the universe, and it was theirs to protect. Jeremy looked at her, at the silver circlet on her temple, at the determined set of her jaw despite her pain. The fight clarified in his mind, snapping into a new, sharper focus. This wasn't just about justice for a crime. It wasn't about exposing a corrupt official. It was about the small, shielded room they were in. It was about the life growing inside her. It was about a future that had to include the three of them. He was no longer fighting against something. He was fighting for something. The dynamic between them shifted, the final pieces locking into place. The rescuer and the victim were gone. What remained were partners, allies in a revolution they never asked for, bound by culture, by trauma, and now by the promise of a family. Their bond became the core of it all, the unshakable center from which every future action would spring. It was the reason to keep going when the odds were impossible. In the quiet hum of the workshop, her synthesized voice appeared in his mind, clear and thoughtful, carrying the weight of a changed perspective. You are not what I expected from a human. The statement was simple, but it carried the force of a cultural barrier cracking. Her preconceptions, the stereotypes of his species, were breaking down under the weight of his actions, under the reality of the man in front of her. It was the beginning of something new, built not on what they were supposed to be, but on what they had chosen to become together. Holt secured a place in the human diplomatic quarter. It wasn't much, a small apartment tucked away from the main thoroughfares, but the door had a better lock and the walls were thicker. Its real value came from the limited sovereignty the zone offered. Valkyrie security couldn't just kick the door down. They'd need paperwork, a formal request. It bought time. Not much, but some. The protection was better, but the visibility was higher. If they were found here, it would be a political incident. A messy one. The station-wide alert had already gone out. Valkyrie security forces were scouring every sector. The official bulletin called them terrorists, dangerous fugitives. The charge was vague enough to justify any level of force. The tension was a constant hum in the background, like the station's life support systems. They were hunting her. The pressure was closing in. Moving her was the hardest part. Jeremy used his mechanics codes, routing a large equipment transport crate through the service corridors. He laid Nari inside, nestled among spare parts and insulation foam. The crate's internal sensors were easy to spoof. To any scanner, it read as inert cargo. He pushed it through the maze of maintenance tunnels, his heart hammering against his ribs every time he passed a patrol. The journey was a long, silent crawl through the station's guts. Diplomatic zones are strange places. They're bubbles of claimed territory, patches of one world stitched onto another. In a crisis, they don't offer safety. They become targets. The first place an enemy looks for someone hiding. The apartment felt like that. A temporary bubble that could pop at any second. Inside, the work began. Holt had brought a secure data terminal. They started assembling the case. Jeremy downloaded the files from his own hidden backups, the contamination reports, the authorization codes, the biological signatures of the engineered parasites. Nari, through the Neuralink, directed them. Her synthesized voice was calm, precise, guiding them through the evidence trail. She was their primary witness. Her testimony, delivered through the machine, was their strongest weapon. She was preparing her statement, organizing the facts with a clarity that cut through the fear. Holt watched it all, his face grim. He understood the weight of what they were doing. This wasn't a simple whistleblower case. They were building a legal and political bomb aimed at the most powerful man in the Valkyrie hierarchy. High Counselor Dravik had friends. He had resources. He controlled the security forces that were currently hunting them. This was a direct challenge to his authority, and men like that didn't respond with lawsuits. They responded with violence. Holt's warning was simple. They were poking a bear with a very sharp stick, and the bear had an army. They had their operational base, a place to hide, to plan, to gather their strength. But with every piece of evidence they verified, with every line of testimony Nari prepared, the walls of the safe house felt a little thinner. The lock on the door felt a little weaker. They were building their case, but they were also painting a giant target on their location. The sanctuary was also the most obvious place for their enemies to look. It was a race. Could they assemble the truth and get it out into the world before that truth got them killed? The safe house was their fortress and their trap, and they were locking themselves inside. Lieutenant Howell leaned over the console, her face lit by the screen's glow. "We go live." Station-wide broadcast. Every screen, every public comms panel. "Flood the zone." The suggestion landed like a physical object in the quiet room. It was the nuclear option. Going public was their only real shot. Putting the evidence out there, raw and unfiltered, meant the Valkyrie Council couldn't bury it. They couldn't delete it from one server if it was on 1,000. But it came with a cost. It made them targets. The second that transmission started, their location would light up on every security console. They were trading stealth for impact. Dravik wouldn't just send a polite request to cease transmission. His operatives were already hunting them. A public broadcast would be a direct challenge to his authority. His response wouldn't be legal. It would be violent and immediate. They were counting on that rage, on the hope he'd make a mistake in his hurry to shut them up. The decision was unanimous. They wouldn't just have Nari speak. They'd use data-assisted testimony. Visual proof would run alongside her words, charts showing the contamination spikes, copies of Dravik's own authorization codes, images of the engineered parasites. The facts would speak for themselves, giving her synthesized voice undeniable weight. Public revelations in closed societies are a known trigger. Regimes built on control don't respond to truth with debate. They respond with force. They reassert dominance. The timing had to be surgical. The broadcast needed to start, to get the data flowing into the public eye, but they had to assume it would be interrupted. They had to say the most important things first. Every second of airtime was borrowed time, bought with their own safety. Nari prepared. She sat quietly, her eyes closed. Through the Neuralink, she ran through her testimony. She refined each accusation, stripping it down to the clearest, hardest facts. She practiced the pacing, the emphasis. This wasn't a speech. It was a weapon. She was loading it round by round. She knew the stakes. This was likely their only chance to speak to the entire population of Helio Station before the doors were kicked in. The pressure was a tangible thing in the small room, a tightening coil of anticipation and dread. They all knew what came next. Retaliation. It wouldn't be a negotiation. It would be a raid. The broadcast was the match. The explosion would follow. They were starting a fire they might not be able to put out. The question wasn't if Dravik would send his people, but how fast and how many. This was the gamble. Truth against power. Their evidence against his army. Howell's fingers flew across the terminal. She bypassed standard security protocols, rerouting the signal through a daisy chain of maintenance and environmental control systems. It was a fragile connection, but it would be harder to trace and kill instantly. She looked at Jeremy, then at Nari. Ready? Her hand hovered over the final command sequence. Nari gave a single, firm nod. Her hands were clenched in her lap, but her posture was straight. Resolved. This was the moment she'd almost died for in that corridor. The reason her voice had been taken. She was about to take it back and use it to bring down the man who had ordered it. Howell tapped the console. A soft chime echoed in the room. Broadcast sequence initiated. The screen showed the signal strength blooming across a schematic of the station. Little lights flickered to life in every sector. Public screens. Private terminals. Comms panels in the corridors. Their truth was now streaming out into the world. They had just painted the brightest possible target on their door, and somewhere alarms were already sounding. The wait was over. The fight was on. The voice that filled the station wasn't human. It was clean, synthetic, processed through the Neuralink, but the conviction behind it was raw and real. I am Nari, former quality control specialist for Valkyrie Medical Exports. The introduction was simple, direct. It established her credibility in a single sentence. She wasn't a random dissident. She was an insider. She knew the system. The reaction was instant. Across the station, security consoles lit up with priority alerts. Valkyrie patrols broke from their routes, mobilizing to triangulate the broadcast source. The hunt was on. Their location was still shielded, but the clock was now counting down in seconds. The tension in the safe house spiked. Howell's fingers flew across her console, layering encryption, trying to buy them more time. Every second of airtime was a victory. Nari didn't pause. She delivered the accusation with cold precision. I present evidence of deliberate contamination orchestrated by High Counselor Dravik of the Valkyrie High Council. The words hung in the air, a direct challenge to the most powerful man on the station. On screens across Helio, visual evidence began to stream alongside her voice. Microscopic images of the engineered parasites, their alien structures clear and menacing. Copies of shipping manifests with Dravik's own authorization codes highlighted. Medical reports from human colonies showing the escalating neurological decay. The proof was methodical, undeniable. The station's population reacted. In the corridors, people stopped. They gathered around public screens, their faces a mix of shock and dawning horror. Some yelled in outrage, the truth hitting them like a physical blow. Others stood in silent disbelief, their trust in the council cracking. A low current of fear ran through the crowd. This was more than a scandal. It was a betrayal that reached into their homes, their medicine cabinets, their bodies. A split screen flickered to life. High Counselor Dravik's face appeared, his expression a mask of cold fury. His image was broadcast from his official chambers, a counter-message pushed through the network. He didn't address the evidence. He attacked the source. Do not listen to this traitor, his voice boomed, dripping with contempt. She speaks lies fabricated by human sympathizers to POP our peaceful trade. He called her a dissident, a criminal, a threat to station security. It was a classic move. Discredit the messenger, ignore the message. Nari's synthesized voice didn't waver. It cut through his denials. Each fact she presented was a hammer blow against the foundation of his power. She cited document numbers. She named colony outposts. She described the slow-acting nature of the biological agents. Her words were weapons meticulously aimed. They struck at the heart of the corruption, exposing the grotesque machinery of the plot. She was speaking the truth she had been mutilated for, and now all of Helio Station was listening. A low gasp escaped her. It wasn't through the Neuralink. It was a physical sound, a sharp intake of breath. Her hand went to her abdomen, her fingers pressing hard against the fabric of her shirt. Her face, already pale, tightened. A wave of pain washed over her features. Jeremy was at her side in an instant, his medic scanner already in hand. The readout confirmed it. Her body was under too much stress. The adrenaline, the pressure, the sheer intensity of the moment had triggered it. Labor had begun. The child was coming. Now. In the middle of their desperate broadcast, with armed forces closing in and a political firestorm raging on every screen, new life was demanding its entrance into the world. The two crises, the personal and the political, collided with brutal force. The door didn't just open. It disintegrated. A shaped charge blew the lock and a section of the reinforced wall inward, filling the air with the hot, sharp smell of melted metal and ozone. Dravik's personal cadre poured through the breach. They moved in a tight, practiced formation, armored in black combat gear that absorbed the light. Their weapons were up, scanning the room. Diplomatic shielding wasn't designed to stop a dedicated military-grade breaching charge. The limited sovereignty of the human quarter meant nothing against raw, applied force. The tension in the room snapped. Holt and Howell dropped into defensive positions behind a flipped table, their sidearms drawn. Their job was simple now. Hold the line, buy time. The irony was thick. They were station security, trained to keep the peace, now firing on a Valkyrie assault team to protect fugitives from their own government. The air hissed with the sizzling crack of plasma rounds. Blue-white bolts of energy scarred the bulkheads, leaving molten grooves in the metal. The room filled with the acrid stench of superheated alloys and the sharp report of human firearms returning fire. Special Forces tactics for high-value target extraction are brutal and efficient. The goal is shock, overwhelming force, and a rapid neutralization. The team wasn't here to negotiate. They were here to silence the broadcast and take possession of the assets, Nari, and the technology she was using. Every move was calculated to compress the defenders' options, to corner them. A voice cut over the general comms channel, cold and mocking. It was Dravik, the whistleblower and her human pet. The taunt was meant to demoralize, to reduce their struggle to something petty and insignificant. You have something that belongs to the Council. The game is over. Jeremy ignored him. He was already moving, his mind working on a different frequency. He wasn't a soldier. He was a mechanic. He grabbed a heavy plasma torch from an open toolkit, its energy cell nearly depleted but still lethal at close range. He used a maintenance panel as a shield, its metal surface deflecting a stray shot in a shower of sparks. He wasn't fighting to win. He was fighting for seconds. Each moment he delayed them was a moment she could keep talking. Nari was on the floor behind the sturdiest console, her body caught between two impossible realities. A contraction seized her, a wave of intense pressure that made her gasp. She wrote it out, her knuckles white where she gripped the edge of the terminal. The Neuralink hummed on her temple. As the pain receded, she focused, pulling the next segment of her testimony from her memory. Her synthesized voice never wavered, continuing its calm, damning recitation of facts into the broadcast stream. The contrast was jarring. The room was chaos and violence. Her voice was a river of cold, hard truth flowing through it. The armed operatives stormed the broadcast for one reason: total control. A public transmission of this magnitude was an existential threat to Dravik's power. Letting it continue was not an option. He needed to seize the source, destroy the evidence, and make an example of everyone involved. The assault was a desperate, violent attempt to reclaim the narrative, to snatch back the truth before it could fully escape into the world. It was a confession of guilt written in plasma fire and breaching charges. The firefight raged, a desperate stalemate of cover and suppression. Holt laid down covering fire while Howell tried to flank. Jeremy used a length of high-tensile fiber optic cable as a whip, tangling the legs of an advancing trooper. It was a delaying action, a hopeless one. They were outgunned and outnumbered. The resolution wasn't in their weapons. It was behind the console. Another contraction, stronger this time, ripped through Nari. Her breath hitched. She couldn't stop it. The biological process had its own timetable, its own inevitability. The birth was no longer approaching. It was happening. Right now. In the middle of the smoke and the shouting and the searing light of plasma rounds, the two crises, the end of one life and the beginning of another, collided in the cramped, burning room. Holt braced himself in the shattered doorway, his shoulder pressed against the scorched frame. He laid down suppression fire, plasma bolts from his rifle sizzling down the corridor. Each shot was a desperate bid for time, a metallic roar against the returning fire from Dravik's advancing forces. The air stank of ionized energy and burnt wiring. Behind him on the floor, Jeremy worked. The medkit was open, Its contents spilled beside him. He followed the rough emergency protocols he'd only ever read about. Clean towels from the safe house's small sanitizer, sterilizing gel for his hands. His movements were quick, practiced from fixing complex machinery, but this was different. This was a life, not a machine. The tension was a physical weight. The stress of the firefight, the fear, the overwhelming pressure, it all threatened the child. A birth under these conditions was a massive risk. The baby might not survive the trauma, or worse, they might deliver it right into the hands of the people who wanted it dead. Nari's body went rigid with another contraction, a wave of pure, intense force. Her breath hitched a silent gasp. Jeremy supported her, his hand steadying her. And then the child was there, a boy. He emerged into the chaotic, smoke-filled room, into the flashing lights and the roar of battle. His appearance was immediate, undeniable. His skin held a pale blue hue like his mother's, but with the warmer undertones of human pigmentation. A faint silver-brown dusting of hair covered his head. His features were a perfect, impossible blend. He was visibly, undeniably a hybrid of both species. For a terrifying second, there was no sound from the baby. The stress of the violent delivery threatened his viability. Jeremy's heart hammered against his ribs. Then a sharp, clear cry cut through the noise of the firefight. It was a human sound, primal and strong, but it was picked up by the room's sensitive microphones and fed directly into the still active broadcast stream. That first cry went out to every screen on Helio Station. The effect on the Valkyrie forces was instantaneous, a cultural reflex programmed deep into their instincts. The sound of a newborn, a sacred event in their society, caused a palpable hesitation. The rate of fire from the corridor slowed for a critical 2 seconds. Muzzles dipped slightly. It was an involuntary response, a moment of shared humanity or Valkyriness that cut through their conditioning. Holt and Howell didn't question the gift. They seized the advantage. Holt's next plasma burst took down the lead trooper who had been advancing. Howell used the distraction to flank left, her shots pinning down 2 others behind a support column. The breach in their assault was small, but it was enough. They gained precious meters, pushing the firefight back into the hallway, buying the room behind them a sliver of space, a moment of fragile safety. Nari had given birth in the middle of a war zone, shielded by the very man who had saved her, her body accomplishing the miraculous under impossible duress. The resolution was not in a ceasefire, but in the tiny, crying form now cradled in Jeremy's arms. The newborn, this impossible child, was no longer just a secret. He was a symbol. His first cries, his hybrid features were now visible to the entire station population watching the broadcast. He was living proof that the old divisions were breaking down, a new reality born literally in the crossfire. The child's body was the first thing Jeremy scanned. The portable med scanner's display showed impossible data. The genetic markers were a perfect blend, strands of human and Valkyrie DNA intertwined in a way that shouldn't exist. Medical experts from both species had spent decades proving cross-fertility was a biological dead end. Their cells were too alien to each other. The textbooks were wrong. Hybridization wasn't impossible. It was happening right here, breathing in his arms. He was holding a living, breathing revision of accepted science. Physiologically, the readings were stable. More than stable. The baby's vitals showed enhanced cellular regeneration, a stronger-than-average heart rate, and a unique neuroelectrical signature. He seemed to have the best of both. Valkyrie resilience, human adaptability. The phenomenon is rare, but it occurs. Hybrid vigor. Sometimes the combination of 2 different genetic lines produces a stronger result than either parent species. This baby wasn't just viable. He was thriving despite the violent circumstances of his birth. He was a biological marvel. The child in his arms was so much more than a medical anomaly. He was a political statement, a cultural bridge made of flesh and blood. He represented a future where the 2 species weren't at war, but were literally family. He was a wordless, powerful argument for cooperation that no speech or treaty could ever match. His very existence challenged the foundation of the conflict, the idea that they were too different to ever find common ground. He was the common ground. The Valkyrie forces in the corridor hadn't advanced. The baby's cry had stopped them. In their culture, birth is a sacred event, protected and revered. Attacking during it was a profound taboo. Their training and their cultural programming were at war. Their weapons were still in their hands, but the muzzles were lowered. They looked at each other uncertain. Their orders were to neutralize the targets, but their instincts told them they were witnessing something holy. The battlefield had just gotten complicated. Over the open comms channel, new voices began to interrupt the static and Dravik's furious commands. Station medical teams, alerted by the broadcast, were requesting emergency access. They weren't talking about fugitives or terrorists anymore. They were asking to examine the newborn. They used words like miracle and unprecedented. Their professional curiosity, their Hippocratic oaths, overrode the political manhunt. They wanted to see the child, to understand the biological event that had just rewritten the rules. The baby's uniqueness wasn't just in his DNA. It was in his effect. He had, in a matter of moments, completely changed the nature of the conflict. He transformed a violent raid into a cultural and medical incident. The soldiers weren't sure if they were an assault team or a security detail for a historic event. The priority shifted from capture to preservation. The impossible child had, with his first breath, created a ceasefire not through force but through sheer undeniable existence. He was the proof that changed everything, and everyone in that corridor knew it. The arrival was formal, silent. High Elder Marina stepped through the breached doorway, ignoring the smoke and the scorch marks. She was old, her skin a network of fine silver lines, her posture erect with an authority that felt ancient. She didn't wear a security uniform. Her robes were simple, dark, marked with symbols of her station. She represented a different power structure, one that predated the political council. Her arrival shifted the air in the room. This was no longer a military operation. It was a cultural inquiry, and her judgment would be absolute. Her medical and scientific teams followed, moving with quiet efficiency. They didn't look at the weapons. They looked at the people. The tension was a held breath. Marina's assessment could go either way. Under Valkyrie traditional law, something this unprecedented, this outside the natural order, could be declared an abomination. A thing to be contained, studied, and perhaps eliminated. Or she could see it for what it was. A miracle, a sign. Her decision would set the precedent for how her entire culture would respond. Elders hold that power. They define the borders of acceptance. She didn't speak at first. She approached Jeremy, who still held the child. Her movements were slow, deliberate. She produced a small ornate scanner from within her robes. Its light, a soft gold, washed over the baby. The device hummed, analyzing the genetic signature in real time. The data confirmed everything. The healthy, stable vitals. The impossible fusion of human and Valkyrie DNA. The child was not a monster. He was a marvel of biology. A living, breathing answer to a question nobody had thought to ask. Marina looked from the scanner's readout to the baby's face. Her own stern expression softened just for a moment. A sense of genuine wonder passed over her features. She had seen the evidence of Dravik's corruption through the broadcast. She had heard Nari's testimony. Now she saw the child that corruption had tried to silence. The pieces connected. She turned to her aides and to the remaining security forces who stood uncertainly in the hall. Her voice, when it came, was clear and carried the weight of finality. She declared the child a scientific and cultural milestone, a being that transcended their differences. Her word was law. That declaration broke the last of Dravik's power. His own people, the Valkyrie security troops, moved on the High Elder's quiet command. They turned on their former master. Dravik was taken into custody there in the corridor. His protests silenced, his authority shattered in an instant. He was a political problem now, not a power. The shift was immediate. With the High Elder's blessing, human authorities from the station command finally felt safe to act. They entered the safe house, their demeanor changed. They were no longer hesitant or complicit. They were compelled to address the contamination evidence seriously, now backed by the highest traditional Valkyrie authority. The station's priority completely changed. The manhunt was over. The alarm stopped. The emergency was no longer about capturing fugitives. It became a coordinated medical and diplomatic operation. Teams focused on securing the family, on studying the child, on beginning the long process of addressing the systemic poison Dravik had unleashed. The battlefield had become a nursery, and the rules of engagement had been rewritten by the quiet word of an elder and the quiet breath of a child. Change comes slow to Helio Station. The smell of scorched metal and gunfire fades from the safe house, but the memory hangs in the air. The Human Valkyrie Cultural Exchange Center opens a month later. It's a clean, bright space built near the diplomatic quarter. Its purpose is simple: give both sides a neutral ground, a place to talk instead of fight. It's a symbol, a physical sign that things are different now. Old prejudices don't just vanish. You still see humans cross the corridor to avoid a Valkyrie patrol. Valkyrie traders still use hard glances when a human customer talks too loud. The fear and suspicion are old habits. They take time to break. The center is the first real effort to try. Nari gets a new interface. Valkyrie bioengineers work with the human tech. They refine the Neuralink, integrate it with her specific biology. It's not a stolen prototype anymore. It's hers. The new device captures more than words. It catches the subtle shifts in her voice, the emotions she couldn't show before. She can speak with inflection now, with feeling. The difference is immediate. When she talks, people listen. They hear the person, not just the machine. Healing a society after a crisis requires symbols. It needs new institutions to replace the broken trust. The Exchange Center is that symbol. It gives everyone a place to point to and say, "We are trying." The medical supply network gets ripped apart and rebuilt from scratch. Every shipment, every container now has a mixed inspection team. Human and Valkyrie technicians work side by side. They run scans, take samples, and sign off together. The oversight is total. The system Dravik exploited is gone. The evidence of the contamination leads to trials. They aren't quiet affairs. They're public, broadcast across the station. Everyone watches the proceedings. The reforms are system-wide. New protocols. New accountability. It's a direct response to the poisoning, a guarantee it can't happen again. Jeremy's workshop changes too. It's no longer just his messy sanctuary. It becomes something else, a meeting point. Valkyrie apprentices show up curious about his hybrid tech. He shows them how human circuitry can interface with Valkyrie power cells. They bring him components he's never seen. They work together on projects. The space, once a hiding place, turns into a workshop of cooperation. It's a small thing, but it matters. It shows the practical side of the new peace. High Elder Marina's declaration stands. The child is recognized, protected. The station's leadership, both human and Valkyrie, operates under this new reality. The transformation isn't a single event. It's a process. A slow, difficult recalibration of an entire society. The station that hunted them becomes the station that protects them. It becomes a model, a living example of how former enemies can find a way to work together. It's not perfect. Tensions flare. Arguments happen. But the direction is set. The truth didn't just cause a rebellion. It forced a partnership. The fallout from that single act of defiance rewrote the rules for everyone. The station becomes a bridge, and the people on it learn day by day how to cross it. They become a unit, a family. The personal dimension of a political shift. Nari, Jeremy, and their son Tar. The kid is a fact now. He walks, he talks. His skin holds that pale blue hue. His eyes a shade of silver you don't see on humans. He's a walking, talking piece of evidence that the old rules don't apply. They live with the scrutiny. Every move is watched. Traditionalists from both sides don't just disappear. A human might mutter something ugly under their breath in a market line. A Valkyrie elder might give them a look of pure, cold disapproval. The prejudice is a low, constant hum in the background of their lives. There is no clear path for a family like theirs. They have to make the road as they walk it. Nari uses the voice they tried to take from her. Her speeches at the Exchange Center draw crowds. The refined neural interface lets her speak with a resonance she never had before. The words carry the weight of her experience. She talks about truth, about the cost of lies, about what it means to build something new instead of just fighting over the ruins of the old. Her voice is a tool. She uses it to chip away at the walls between their peoples. A visible family, especially one born from such public trauma, can shift perceptions faster than any policy paper. They become a point of reference. People see them and something clicks. The abstract idea of peace gets a face, 3 faces. Scientists from both species track Tar's development, regular checkups, genetic mapping. They are fascinated. He is their greatest living case study. The kid doesn't know he's a scientific marvel. He's just a boy trying to navigate a world built for 2 separate kinds of people. He belongs to both and to neither. His life is the ultimate experiment in interspecies relations, and he's living it day by day. They could have left. Requested transport to some quiet colony, somewhere they wouldn't be a spectacle. They choose to stay on Helio Station. This is where it happened. This is where the fight was. It feels like their responsibility to see it through, to help build the community they almost died to create. Their apartment is a testament to that. A mix of human and Valkyrie design. It's not always comfortable, but it's honest. Jeremy's workshop is different now. Valkyrie apprentices work alongside him. They bring their own tools, their own techniques. He shows them how to patch a human power conduit. They show him how to recalibrate a Valkyrie sensor array without blowing the core. The collaboration is practical. It's about getting the job done. It's about learning that the other way isn't wrong, just different. It's in these small daily interactions that the real change happens. Not in speeches, but in shared labor. They become a symbol because they persist. They don't have a choice. Their existence is the argument. Every time they walk through the station corridors together, they are making a statement. Every time Nari speaks, she is defying the act that was meant to silence her forever. They are the living, breathing answer to the violence that created them. The story's conclusion is written in their life together. A life built on a simple, powerful truth. Your tongue was severed for lies, but your truth changed worlds. They are the change. They are the new world. And they are just getting started. History isn't written by councils or committees. It gets made in the bloody corridors by mechanics seeing an injustice and deciding it's their problem. Jeremy's choice to lift Nari up rewrote the future for two species. That one act of defiance, born from a simple sense of what was right, shattered a corrupt regime. Courage isn't some grand, sweeping gesture. It's a quiet decision in a terrible moment. Real bridges aren't built by governments drafting treaties. They're built by ordinary people willing to risk everything for a single, powerful truth. The future gets built one choice at a time.